Yeah, I'll just start recording.
Yeah, it looks real nice, Yasha. Very
Uh,
concise after a lot of different ideas.
let
Yeah,
me
you guys
just,
should be able to edit it too. So
great.
I'll be back in 1 sec. We keep going.
Sure. No, I was just gonna say that I was contacted by the guys from the journal again because after the last meeting and the talk over on WhatsApp, I contact them just saying that we would need an extra week to tell them what we would be proposing, and that we probably would have some questions in terms of what type of format they allows us to do. They seemed pretty willing to accommodate. They were actually excited that there would be formatting problems, like made us seem like we're, vanguard fiction theorists or some crazy thing like that. And so my idea was to email them either tonight after the meeting or tomorrow, at least with an idea. Also, so having questions that we can ask them, or like, okay, we were thinking of something like this. Could you guys accommodate it? Would be good to send it their way, either today or tomorrow, just so we can start also planning more like the presentation of it all based on what they can actually do, right? And that doesn't require too much effort. I imagine that basic idea of having some image kind of repeating in every page or something like that, it shouldn't be a big problem anyway. So shouldn't be hard to come up with a kind of simple solution if we follow that basic idea, right? I wonder, I'm still convinced of it. I'm not sure what you guys think, but I know that there was some discussion over exactly how to do it. Like, I think if I understood correctly, Asha, you proposed that perhaps it would be more interesting to, let's say, start with nothing on the page and kind of get to this more complicated image.
Build up, yeah.
And then have it there for the next bits. And I was saying that perhaps even if we do that, we should be careful not to suggest to the reader that we're gonna kind of construct that thing bit by bit, because there's no space, right, to do it. So even if we want to introduce it like slowly, still we would have to do it in a way that doesn't kind of require too much effort. I think that it's important to remember, like, we would have, I think, exactly 1 month to work on this. I think the fact that we're sharing the work between many people makes it feasible. Like, I think ideally nobody would have a lot to write. And we would probably need, we probably have a couple of days to like we can send something a bit sketchy in terms of how it's presented, and we can kind of work around that, or work that part with them after the deadline, probably, So we probably have around 1 month to actually have the writing we want. So I think it's good when we plan on what we want to contribute and things like this, to imagine things that can be done in that amount of time without stressing too much anyone, like not really proposing anything we wouldn't be in a position to write or talk about kind of right now. Like, I think if you were thinking of writing something that would require you to study a lot this whole month, probably there is a different way of approaching that would work better. So, like, I think that's a good principle as well. Even in that case, I think we wouldn't have that much trouble introducing the things. Like, I think the basis of these things we can write them down in a couple of pages. I don't think it would be total mess. Another thing that I think in terms of schedule is that probably we should imagine something like 3 weeks or 2.5 weeks to have our sections, so that everyone can read everyone, and we can kind of fine tune them, one with the other a bit. So we would need a bit of time for that as well. So it's good to leave to again kind of calibrate our efforts and our ideas for what to write, knowing that it's not even the whole month, but probably a part of the month, so that we have another part to talk it over and kind of integrate them a bit more, perhaps, right?
Yeah, I think we should also get a better idea of the connection between the kind of like shared project and the individual
Mhm.
contributions, right? Because I
Yeah.
think we want to think of the individual contributions as like part of some larger thing.
Mhm.
And like, how do we present that larger thing in the context of the contributions as well?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is a good place to start, like talking about stuff, like just to
Mhm.
like I propose that figure as a sort of way of summarizing some stuff in a very condensed way, because I mean, this actually could be easily an introductory section, like to talk about this, right? But people who read Karatani's thing with, capital, nation, and state know that he talks about it as if it's like this, right? You have like a Borromean knot. This is not a Borromean knot, but you guys know what I mean, right? With those
Mhm.
three modes. But everyone in philosophy who talks about Borromean knots doesn't really know what they're talking about. Like, it's just a word we use to say it's like they're really integrated, but like we don't really know how to expand on that usually. So I found this logician, who's actually a friend of Badiou's and a reader of Lacan as well, called René Guittard. And he tried to propose a sort of approach to like a logic that would have the properties that the Borromean knot has. And the way that he writes this is like the basic diagram for these relations. I think it's something like this. So using the three Karatani logics would be something like this, with a Borromean object in the middle. You get to this sorry, just add residue. You get to this object by from these different logics, and you get from these logics to their, let's say, partial connection. So A plus C, A plus B, and B plus C, right? And now I don't remember exactly, but I have the impression that the arrows from AB are inverted. They're like this.
Yeah, that's how you had it.
Yeah, how you
right?
had it in the thing is like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so this would be, and we can look into it in more detail if you guys want, but this would be a way of writing in terms of mappings, the properties that we usually associate with this thing. So this big object here, which has this sort of weird intersection, or whatever you want to call it, this Borromean kind of articulation, you get the right properties for it if you write the partial things, A, B, and C, having these arrows in these directions and so on. So what?
So in your monster, that central B was K, right? It was the
yeah. I'm just writing B for the Borromean thing. So, but
So-
I wrote that.
So it's the idea of the mapping out, basically, that like the pairings are always subordinate to the way the three of them come together.
Yeah.
The pairings don't have like, okay.
So you see, like I cannot pair them together straight from, like it's also submitted to the complete thing here, right? There is an arrow going from the 3 to the 2, meaning I cannot just uncouple A and B and still have A plus B. Like the K thing here has some information about their complementary relations, if you will. But regardless, sorry, yeah.
Another way we should think of it is taking any path in this diagram, it should be equivalent. So
yeah,
A going to A plus B should be equivalent to A going to K and then to A plus B.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So
Perfect.
that any set of arrows from A to A plus B, or any set of paths, let's say, must also contain K. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Another way of saying what you're saying.
Yeah, to go
You
from
also can't get
Must
out of
factor
any
through
pairing,
K.
right? Like there's no paths
Yeah.
out of pairing. So the pairings are always just kind of just abstractions, right? They're not actually interacting.
perfect. Yeah.
Mhm.
So it's really nice to see that you do capture some of the ideas behind sort of it's an interlocking of three things that you can't really take one away that you lose all the connections, right? You don't have the complementary relations separate. But what I suggested, which I think is a bit like, so Guitar writes this down for us, which is cool. We should be able to use it to follow the multi-layered thing that we always talk about and so on. This should be fitting as an image so we can, for example, explore it and say things like, somebody's going to talk just about this. So you understand like where you are in their contribution, right? Or somebody's going to talk about the relation between state and reciprocity. You can write that down, right? Or you can even be more precise, like write something like this. If you're not discussing it in pure form, but you're discussing it specifically under capitalist conditions, right? So you're considering this arrow here. It's not abstracted away from, right? So we could use this image to navigate on how we, like, as if it's like one of those shopping mall maps, like you're here, right? And have this kind of thing as the general map, and kind of added signals to show where you are in that section of the text. The thing that I try to add, which I think is missing in this image, which is both an epistemological issue that we should consider more generally. I think that there's a good discussion to be had that we haven't had yet. Because, one question you could ask is, we want to write this thing in our project. We want to come up with this multi-layered blah, 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 blah. And then we're going to deduce politics out of it. Are there going to be arrows coming out of this to what should be done politically, right? Determining it. No, that's not the case. Our whole point is that somehow politics seems to be, and organizations to be, the way that we learn about these things. And I think that there is a good case for the fact that we learned about A, B, and C, like they are the product of something that sees them. And that's what, different traditions of the left already do. That's why I propose that we write something like organization here. The proper name for this shouldn't be actually organization. In my opinion, should be like the communist idea or something, right? And you have arrows coming from here to this, because you can see B, A, and C from this perspective. And this kind of captures suddenly something that interests us a lot, which is the more complex and rich this is, the more we get to learn about this, right?
Yeah,
So,
I think it's really supposed to emphasize like the site as an experimental.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that this is the complete image that actually captures not only, let's say, the analytic part in the sense of, how about we treat capitalist societies as a complex mixture of these different modes of exchange, blah, 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 but puts it into, more prescriptive, more kind of political context, in the sense that, yeah, whatever you can do here will have a correlate on what you learn about this thing here. So it's, let's say, politics is in the forefront, is not the derived thing formally, even though, so this is useful for us because it allows us to say, okay, like you think we're doing like some crazy formal abstract thing, but it's actually just kind of articulating the results of 100 or so, 200 years of political struggles in many different fronts, right? I would even say that probably we could do it like this if you want. Like if we want to tell a story, we could probably do it like this. There's actually, let's say, a political fight against, for example, oppression, segregation, political fight which happens inside of anthropology for the, recognition of the radically different types of worlds that people live in and so on, right? There is an anti-capitalist politics that has helped shape how we see what value, money, capital are, so on. There is also kind of political tradition that fights against the state, monopoly of violence, imperial forms of oppression or whatever, right? And the definition of communism, right, if you read in the Communist Manifesto, is that it doesn't have political content that is different from other proletarian struggles, but it represents the interest of the movement as a whole. So you can write this communist thing here, and it should be able to see these three things. Like it can recognize the common part in these three things. So we could say that the current state of politics is like the blue arrows. They exist. They're quite fragmented, but they do have a tradition, like different traditions that help us learn about this big K here, right? But the question is it possible to imagine transformations of one sole communist space that account for these arrows here, right? That is able to see these different traditions as part of kind of a broader thing, right? So we can decompose that org thing I added into actually this thing here and these three different kind of strains, right? That this would be, let's say, an unpacked version of that. And this is, I would say that these three tiers are pretty much where we're struggling. Like, is it possible to account for, you know, such different politics and different worldviews of politics within the left, such as struggles that fight the state front, struggles that fight the communitarian front? Of course, they're all mixed, but still, can we kind of find a common way of talking about these things that still respects their difference, such that we can see it all from one perspective, right? That would be something like the communist perspective, this big C here. And these changes here would account for communist experiments that take all of this into consideration, right? So, I mean, this is
to complete the picture also is like, since it's we're able to commute, meaning this long path from C to K yields a single arrow from C to K, right?
Yeah, which is called destroying the empire.
Yeah, it's the revolution, right? Revolution arrow. And this revolution arrow is actually the path, all three paths, right? Mm-hmm. All three of these long paths.
Yeah, exactly.
Simultaneously.
Yeah, this double arrow that you added here would be something like the perspective of a heterogeneous ecology of organizations. They can be very different in how they interact with this K, but from the perspective of C, you can see them all adding to some sort of common direction, right?
So if we use Karatani's language and like think about like TD, would that be specifically in like the arrow to itself of communism, or would all the arrows from C to the P's and so forth be part of the local construction of like a TD? Where does?
Yeah, I think that this is a way we can criticize him a bit and say, look, perhaps he made too quick a jump and saying that everything that is doing something against this trinity is already a constituted mode, right? And I think we're saying like there's more of a patchwork of stuff that doesn't necessarily go together, right?
Even though we haven't talked about it, that reminds me of the Nunes book a lot. Mm-hmm. Like you said, with the
it has everything to do with it.
The ecology of organization. Yeah.
Become here, right? So yeah, I think that what Karatani does is that he doesn't allow us to decompose things in this more complicated way, because he just names. He says, well, there is something else called the D mode here, which can, you know, mediate between the other three. It has some intrinsic properties that are of interest, and it's harder to explore what this all would mean practically, right? Whereas these arrows we're adding here, they are not. We don't know what's in them. We just know what they could be doing if they are to complete this diagram, right? So in one version of this, so this is why I proposed that thing. I substituted all these red and blue arrows for just an org thing. But in some way, we could even have this more complicated thing. And again, nothing prevents us from having sections that go like this and just talk about the communist hypothesis in general, or what does it mean to have an ecology of organization, you know, or political struggle from the communitarian point of view. Alan, are you raising your finger? Like,
yeah, I'm just waiting for you to conclude.
Sorry,
I didn't want to interrupt because I was curious where you were getting at. Something that I'm not sure by your explanation is, it seems that the second diagram, different from the Borromean knot, it assumes the perspective of K to map, like it's like taking the relationship between A, B, and C from the standpoint of C. And this is why capital would organize A, B, and C. But you could think of the same diagram being organized by B or by A, which could also be K's, right? It could be like the king or kinship, like all K's organized,
true,
but every time it's from a different perspective. And it kind of has it has impacts in the sense that the second one is less general than the first one, and as in the same way that the second one is less general than the problem of organization itself, which can appear from different perspectives and can be generalized as, for, I don't know, like kind of some kind of general K of all the possible Ks that are organized in the three modes, but the organization would be different than this one. So this one would be more concrete because this one is a diagnosis of how capitalism organizes the three modes. And if that's the case, then P1, P2, P3 are not that, it doesn't seem to be that complicated anymore because they are forms of anti-capitalist struggle. So you don't have to account for all kinds of dispute over land or over like kinship ties and regicide and fights against tyranny and slavery and everything. You don't have to put all forms of struggle against these modes because you would be restricting to the capitalist version of the articulation of the tree. And if that is the case, then that diagram could become like a 3D diagram in which it opens this way to K as a form of organization from the standpoint of capital, and it opens like back to C, in which C organizes like K the point common to all forms of negation. And then it's just a simple matter of opposition between the A version of the capitalist triangle in which it opposes, and then the C version of the capital triangle in which P2 opposes, and the B version that P3 opposes. And that, like K, is the single point that gives information about all of them, and it's where all of them meet. Then C would also be where all of them meet. It would be like transcendentally there, at least.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think at the end there, I'm not sure I follow like what would be, how you would rewrite it. But one thing that I agree that is missing here, like Karatani does something that is not, it's contained in this diagram, but it's not clear from it, which is he makes a distinction between the dominant mode, right? So for example, could you tell by looking at this thing here, if A, B, or C is the dominant? Like, why would we write it like this rather than like this, as you said, right? For example. And I think it's an added condition here that's not clear from the diagram, that this pole here is the one that like if you were to take one of the three, this is the one that still is maximally reaching, right? The world seen from the perspective of commodity alone is still more kind of makes more things visible than if you were to take another perspective, right? Like that added flavor that this is the strong foot, like the logic that sees the most. I don't think it's actually contained in this diagram. Just by looking at it, you wouldn't tell. Like, it could be the diagram for any social formation, right? So there is something about this thing here that perhaps is missing in this way of writing it that we should account for. Like,
maybe we can call it KC, like with a
yeah, just to have
C.
like to make clear, right?
Because the point is not C itself. It's
Yeah,
how
exactly.
K is like submitted to the logic of mode C, and it could be otherwise.
Yeah, it could be otherwise. Then the second part of what you said that I think, I mean, for example, in reality, do different sorts of pure struggles, pure state struggle, pure community, they don't exist, right? They're mixed, right? I think it's just an abstraction. Like you're decomposing this arrow here, which is like a mixed bag of stuff happening, into the fact that we could like legitimately see that there are organizations that they might be in like on paper they are anti-capitalist, but they're not doing anything that has any bearing on the structure of commodity production. It does have some bearing on, let's say, fighting racist legislation. So we could accept that there are organizations that have that have power to change something effectively at one level, but not at the other, right? So I think that this is a kind of abstraction, a sort of pure abstraction, in the same way that C, B, and A are pure abstractions because they never exist in that way. So we could simplify it, even in this case here. Nothing prevents us just from removing this and just from having those three arrows anyway, right? We could even call those three arrows P1, P2, P3, like the ones I proposed before, like this.
Yeah, I think it's fine that there are abstractions like this, especially because I think our claim is that like the experimentation in practice always involves some like non-trivial combination of them.
Yeah, exactly. In reality, you're always mixing these things up. And I think that the sort of thing we could say that is new is to say the way you mix these things up has some correlation with the sort of information you will get from the way the world resists to this organization, right? So you can imagine that there is a particular arrow here, I don't know, some arrow here, which is inside of this, like some part of this combinatory thing here, which is an organization. And this organization here is actually, you know, it negates the logic of the family under capitalism very much. It has a proposal on the legal status. It wants to force the state to recognize something like, for example, gay marriage. But the way it actually integrates with the capitalist world bears absolutely no resistance to it. Like nothing will be learned from the capitalist world. Nothing will be forced onto it. It's just going with the flow. It's like a NGO, right? And we can now say, well, this is an organization that we could learn something interesting from these interactions with the world, but it probably will learn nothing interesting here, right? So this sort of complex structure is here in the mix of this, and these three arrows here are just abstractions, kind of purifications of these things, right? So in any case, I mean, I think we can. This would definitely deserve a much more detailed discussion than we could do today. But it's just I think it's enough to suggest that something like this image is a nice map to have in the text in some way, right? And for us to use it today as a way to single out how we want to section this thing, right? And perhaps help each other to see ways of, because, for example, let's say I want to talk purely about value. Like, for example, I want to add in the text a short textile which is based on the primer, which is just showing that there is a description of C which is coherent with the description of this whole thing, meaning it has some categorical flavor, it's compositional, it's arrow based and so on, right? Well, it's important that when I do this, I know that I might not be accounting for this or talking about this, but that C is different from K, that there are arrows coming out of C to kind of this mixed sums here, right? And things like that. So even if that's not what I'm writing about, just contextualizing different slices in terms of this bigger picture might be helpful also to give us ideas or to
Yeah, I mean, do we want to maybe start with the ideas we already had for like the contributions?
yeah, I
and
think
see if
that's a
there's
good
anything
idea.
else?
Like what was vented like discussed already?
What was already discussed, there's 4 of them. I don't know if everyone agreed to do them, but there were at least ones that were put out there. Something about the logistic stuff from John. The ecology and Karatani connection. I have them in the Google Doc also. I already written that before. Dumont and the heteromeric perspectives. I don't know if Alan said he was open to looking at that. And the fetishism and mode B stuff. But I'm sure there's more.
The Dumont thing is something Thiago was working on. I don't think he joined us yet, but today. But it's a thing that he actually already wrote, he published, where he tried to interpret the way that maternal kind of, how do you call this, like lineages, you can kind of make a comparison between how money sees commodities and the way that the sort of weird othering of mother and child makes up for a special object in kinship relation. So the fact that a mother has a special relation to a part of herself, which is the child, also makes her a special object from which you see things in the world in a specific way, right? And part of this theory he's taking from this anthropologist called Dumont. And then there was the fetishism and mode B in that. I mean, I think that we probably needed to add, like, there are some things in terms of, let's say, like the introduction or more general things that probably we would have to say something about it all, right? Like, just thinking here, like following what you suggested, yeah, there should be something that accounts for how we construct this big thing, right? Like an introduction to the diagram, right?
Yeah, I was thinking of that almost as like a second half of the paper entirely. That like is sort of the unified part, and then the I guess like maybe like organizational interventions or something is like the other contributions.
Yeah,
especially because we want to think of them as like sort of glued onto this larger.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I was a bit skeptical about that is just because I think that if we commit to having half of this being, I mean, I think if we commit to have half of the text being kind of a step-by-step, more or less rigorous introduction to the whole thing, it might be doable.
I don't know if that's the step-by-step or rigorous, but like at least motivating it a little, because it's a lot to throw at someone.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Background or interest right away.
Yeah, but I think that we could, yeah, but I think we could throw it as a section. Like, for example, I think I could write like 3 or 4 pages that introduce the whole thing, you know, in a way that it doesn't make it bigger than other sections. Like, we can just call it like a section that kind of covers the whole thing, very coarse grained, you know. It would have to. kind of account for why the arrows are moving the direction that they are, something like that, right?
Yeah, I was sort of like, I don't know, sort of intuitively visualizing it as something that would be like, so this beginning, like you give the very skeleton that covers mostly Karatani, like, so basically A, B, C, and how they form into K. And then because already it like, it sort of looks like the numbers 1 to 4, they already concern like those interrelations. So those, like those more complex parts of the diagram, so like A plus B, B plus C, so they cover things in that sort of a way already. So I think that this like this introduction could be sort of this very bare bones, like, yeah, little introduction of mode A, mode B, and mode C, mostly like explain it, like departing from Karatani in a way.
Yeah,
At
I
least
think
how
so too.
I
Yeah.
imagine it.
Sorry, can you guys remind me how many words is this?
They were very generous, let's put it like this, in their last communication. When I said them that we wanted to do something that might require some weird formatting, they say just, yeah, fine, just, we say 3,000 words, but just be as long as you want.
3,000?
Yeah.
3,000 is like 6 pages.
Yeah, no, but I wouldn't worry about it. Like they seem happy to accommodate. It's like it's not a printed thing, so I mean, caring about pages is a bit artificial. I think one thing we did say is that we would try, let's say, to have individual sections, even from a standpoint of how much effort we can put into these things. Yeah, 30,000 sounds more realistic. We can just have a book. So I think that if we imagine that none of the sections have more than 3 or 4 pages, and that ideally they keep it to like 2, right? It looks like something around 20 something. It will look like a long article, but not like a delirious thing like the primer, which is, we call it an essay, but it's 120 pages long. Like it should have like a normal person lifetime extension, right? So I know that Renzo also proposed perhaps to write something about the courier strikes.
The courier strikes might also be a good opening, motivating example. Like, how do we make sense of these? What kind of tools do we need to kind of zoom in and out, and then kind of frame a way to kind of like link something very concrete to the need for this abstract diagram we're going to bring up.
Yeah, I mean, I find it hard not to say that we need like an introduction that treats itself as an introduction, like, because it's hard to imagine that any specific topic will, which I think, I mean, just to make this clear, right, it's interesting that the problems we're having organizing this text have everything to do with the structure of this diagram, right? If you start from any place, it will look like it's not enough not general enough, right? And so I think that having that, exactly as Rafael said, like something that is really just the bare bones of the structure. I can even imagine like the way that I would propose it if I write or someone else write it, is to imagine that like every paragraph you write, it's explaining one of these things, and one of the arrows, for example, right? So you get these parts, and then at the end of that section, you have like, if you kind of glue everything we just saw, you have this image, and then we keep it from there until the end as this sort of thing, and we just kind of highlight parts of it, right? Sorry, yeah?
No, please. No, you can continue.
What I was going to say is that I think that, like, looking here, I think that we can already have some idea, for example, because there's a small difference, for example, for logistics, as let's say, the form that something about the state takes under capitalist domination, right? It's not just B. It's like this triangle here, right? So it's like, this is like trying to account for this is like this, right? Whereas, for example, talking about like that there is a categorical or some conceptually coherent way of talking about perspectivism and Louis Dumont's theory, it's more like just A abstracted from its interaction with anything else. Like you're cutting those arrows and just seeing A as a pure thing, right? And things like this. So it's we can kind of see that it's not always a matter of just slicing A, B, or C, or sometimes you're actually slicing something slightly bigger, right?
But I think that's also where you got to have some distinction between like the center object in general and then the particular one of any mode of domination. Because I would argue that for logistics, you have logistics in different like epochs of production, but they all go through the center object in a way that makes B plus C a relevant thing. But that doesn't necessarily mean that like that'll look different under the mode of dominance of B in a feudal society than it does under the mode of dominance of C, but they all go through that center object. Let's call it K subscript B or K subscript A or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think you're right, but it's just a matter of, okay, so yeah, for example, you can have this here being KC more specifically or not, if that's not what you want to do. But I think it's just, I'm writing this just because I think it's an inviting thing to filter more specifically, right? Are you going to be writing about the sort of logistic aspect of the state in general or under capitalism? No, you can kind of probably will have, there are different ways to describe it, right? Now, one thing that I besides the intro here, one thing that I think at some point we should have, I mean, the Courier strikes, I think is something like a part of this, right? Guys, just 1 second. Somebody hang the bell here. I'll be right back.
Just while we have a second, I just want to make
Yeah, go ahead.
add just a little clarifying thing when we talk about these commuting diagrams. I think one way we can think of it is, and Yasha, you can clarify with me here. Like if we have an arrow from C, sorry, let's say the organization arrow, O to C to KC, like we're doing this, right? There's this compositional thing happening, right? So that the arrow on top here is equal to the composition of O to C and C to KC. And we can kind of think of it, if we go one level deeper, we can think of it as like, there are some elements of this organization that are picking out elements from here. So let's say there's just a bunch of these points here. And you can't pick everything, right? There is no organization that is going to address all aspects of C, or you can think of it, it doesn't mobilize all aspects of C. It only mobilizes some subset of it, right? And then these parts that are mobilized are the ones that, let's say, attack or make relevant parts of KC. So also KC has a bunch of these points as well. I don't know, just like a really simple way to visualize like factorization of, right? So there's always some stuff that is going to be ignored. Let's say all this stuff is ignored and all this stuff is ignored by any kind of organizational form. So this ecology arrow we're showing here is like some kind of, you can think of it as like a selection algorithm, like way to select parts of the world that should fit, that ought to fit together in this, what we're calling an ecology.
But I have a question about this. So, but what is being ignored in C is different from, like fundamentally different from what is being ignored in KC, in the sense that what is being ignored in KC is passing through A or B, right?
Yeah.
And in
So
the case of C, it would be like outside of the arrangement, so to speak.
Mhm.
yeah, I think we can think of C as the elements that comprise what is sayable or formulatable within using the terms of capital. So things you can, the logic of money, the logic of profit, that's C, right? And any organization is not going to care about, so if you're like a political organization, you might pick out certain elements of C, of the logic of profit. For example, if you're, I don't know, fighting against oil companies or fossil fuel companies, then you care about, let's say, the externalized costs of damage to the environment, right? Then you don't care about all aspects of profit making or like how different companies work together. You might not care about all aspects of competition between firms, whereas within C itself, there are a lot of other things happening with capitalist organizations, like the what capitalist organizations are able to perceive in the field of competition. You as a, let's say, organization that only cares about damage to the environment, you don't care about all those things, right? So I just mean, like, there are aspects of C that are more relevant to this organization because it's trying to change those aspects. And KC is, in my mind, something more like the glue that binds nation, state, and capital together, right? So whatever the common stuff of that binds the bromian knot together. So again, not all aspects of that are even visible to us, right? And one organization cannot see that entire structure. So I guess everything in the green here would be stuff that's not visible or things that currently are not explored. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that another way of putting this that is good is, like, let's say you're exclusively, it's impossible, but imagine that a strike is stopping a factory. Well, to stop a factory, you actually need to have some form of community formed, even if it's a provisory one amongst the workers, and it might be legal or illegal. So there is some reference to the state. But let's say you're not thinking of any of those things, and it's, let's say, going with the current, both in terms of community forms and state. It's both legal and absolutely nothing new is happening in terms of how people are coming together and so on. It's the only, let's say, negation happening is the fact that some form of commodity production is being stopped, right? I think that a good way of thinking about the difference between what's abstracted in C and what is out of the picture in KC is that if you're only, let's say, if you're filtering your action in such a way that everything you're doing is speakable in terms of negations of profit, negation of exploitation, negation of, the circuit of realization of surplus value, blah, blah, blah. There are things that by definition, they're not even in your purview that you could be affecting, right? For example, new forms of association between workers that will survive the strike. People could come together, and even if the strike fails, now people are more, like, the community is more integrated than before, or a new law ended up being passed, right? So if you filter your action only through C, there are things that matter in C and things that don't, in the sense that, for example, you care for stopping production, but you you're never going to articulate what you're doing in terms of financial capital. So there's a part of the language of commodities which is irrelevant to that action. So you're abstracting away from it. That's, let's say, the green part in C. But the very fact that you only are working within C and everything else is kind of out of your purview is limiting how arrows go from C to KC in an even more profound way, right? Because speaking of the world only in terms of profit and exploitation, by default leaves something out, right? Because C is, let's say, smaller than KC.
Yeah, and I think that this can help us also like how we parse specific differences between different ways of like political organizing. So for example, like the difference between a unionized strike and a wildcat strike, for example. Like if you look at them and like at their effects and stuff, you can see a different balance in how they affect each one of the other modes or each one of the other types of relations that they can generate usually. Because like just a crude comment on that, like usually union-led strikes have a relationship with mode B that is like far more it's far more intense, both in terms of what it demands and also in terms of how it negotiates with the state apparatus. And I think that wildcat strikes would be like a different way of looking at the same if we look at the same organization through the distribution between the three modes of exchange, it would look very differently. And it could be a way of parsing them out also.
I also wonder, I think a lot of this, especially the ideas of like what you can see from different perspectives and like the considerations of like parts and wholes requires a lot of this like I guess the objective phenomenological, not backgrounds, but I guess commitments. So I don't know if that can probably be included in the intro to the diagram, or I don't know if you want.
Just say a bit more about it, just to understand what.
Yeah, I mean, just about like the commitment of thinking about parts, especially as like carve outs of spaces in a specific way that allows us to, for example, use these like category theoretic terms to filter it in different perspectives. And that's like what this big diagram sort of is. It doesn't have to be technical, but like more conceptual.
Yeah, I agree. Perhaps we should separate at least
like
for now.
Yeah,
perhaps we should separate at least for now the difference between intro to the diagram and intro to method or to approach.
Yeah, I think you can include some of the things about like how it's not that we learn politics from this, but use this as an organizational space in order to like help organize our political experimentation.
Yeah, and one other thing that I think we would need to have, like I think that something on the courier strikes would be, again, I think it's more like here, right? Picking like finding a specific complex way, an example of a specific complex way of trying to negate something about this and interact with KC, right? But I think that probably we need something. I mean, I'm thinking something in the lines either of what you already have, Dennis, from your presentation on political experimentation, right? But something that would be about this, like what are we calling political experimentation, right? Because probably should be also a bit general as well, and it's not exactly the same as picking an arrow inside of this ecology thing and expanding it, right? So because I mean, this way we kind of have something for all. Like, if we have like these eight things here, I think we pretty much cover a bit of everything, right? Like there's stuff
one
on
of those parts include a summary of the primer.
Yeah,
we could try something like that. Like, yeah.
I don't know if it
we
would be
need
a
to
quick
build a
summary, but
TC
a little bit of a condensed, yeah.
Yeah, just like a very brief. And can we also maybe put the most recent primer PDF up on the website by the time we publish this, so people can immediately refer to it?
Yeah,
because I think if people could immediately turn to that on the basis of this, we could actually potentially pull some new folks in.
No, I agree that it probably would be a good idea to, I mean, we already shared it so much, it's not like it's gonna become more public by doing that, right? So, for example, like just by looking at this, let me just erase this here. We don't need this. So, can I group things? No, this is not that smart, right? But I can make it quick. Like, just do something. So for example, just to start looking at it. So, right, point one is somewhere here, right? It might not be strictly about logistics in KC, but it might be between KC and KNB or whatever, right? Ecology in Karatani seems to be kind of a big, I would say it's probably like this, right? I mean, unless you're talking, because just correct me if I'm wrong, Rafael, but from what we were talking about, you were interested in, for example, talking about how nature appears in each one of the different modes, right? Or different dominations.
Yeah, what I think I might, just as a way to like streamline the argument, I think that they are like while it passes through this type of thing, because also Karatani in the book, like on mode A in particular, he leaves it quite clear when he talks about like gift mode of exchange and really the sort of religion practice on communities in which the mode A prevails. He talks about nature, so like that we have that clear from the outset. So I think that the whole thing streamline actually to the bottom pyramid, like from between B and C in particular, because this is where I think that like the question of ecology needs to begin to be separated, should not appear as if like B and C are the same way of exploiting nature.
Yeah, I think that's
something in particular.
I think that's really, I from what you were talking about, especially the thing you were talking to me about guano, which I found really amazing. I've never heard about it before. I think it's such a good example of how weird it is to think about how different the state and capital see nature. That it's not the same. Like capital doesn't see nature as a resource. That's a state thing, right?
Yeah.
So probably we could focus here, right? Rather than the
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so, because it seems to me also that it matches really well with the argument that Kohei Saito makes in his book about like metabolism, particularly how he talks about Marx taking objects from the two standpoints, so both formal and materials, and I think that matching those two things together actually helps both Saito and Karatani, and both of them become sort of like a different thing, because while like the formal approach that we have in Karatani is far richer in terms of what it can encompass and what it can reach, Saito brings this dimension to the fore, like through the concept of metabolism and stuff. And I think that it could really work. Like I'm very excited for this.
No, I think this could be really, really, really cool, man. I think Thiago's contribution, just from the text that he already has, I'm not sure if he's going to expand on it or something, but it pretty much focuses on, let's say, mode A in actually societies where mode A is dominant. So it's like abstracting mode A from KC, right? So I would probably put it here. I wonder how we could think about this fetishism and mode B, like it in a certain way, it looks like it's a similar thing, right, Alan? Like it's also like, let's look at mode B and its own form of fetishism. So it would be something like also slicing B out of this diagram, right?
Yeah, I think that a thing that we have to make sure that we mention, like on the intro, is the fact that like the slicings are not proportional in any way. So like
I agree.
Because otherwise people might think, okay, like logistics takes a big chunk, and then ecology and Karatani takes like a smaller chunk, and then we have one that is like a very particular like one point in the whole thing. So I think it's good, but I think this is an advantage actually, because
I agree.
it makes clear that the group doesn't necessarily like work within this sort of like very strict structure, but actually that people localize themselves very differently depending on whatever they do.
Yeah, because I think this is what this approach should allows us to do in the end. Like, you can work on something you're already doing. You don't need to stretch it. We don't need to cover everything. It's just that from the perspective of this crazy project, things that could look like they're very kind of separate start looking. It's not that we make them fit; they will look like they fit, right? It's a phenomenological issue. It's not a something we need to necessarily force, right? So I think also it's a good kind of idea when writing to not worry about too much being too consistent with terminology. Or, I mean, if it would be great that we get to have everything written and then we all give it a read and perhaps find a way of approximating it, but we can treat that as a secondary kind of sheathing, a gluing operation. Like we're on the pre-sheave part at this moment, right? Like, it's not necessarily gonna all glue perfectly and so on. But just to make sure, like, so the intro, right, would be something to this whole thing here. 5, the Curious Strike text would be like on this ecology. Let me add the big line here, right, like this. An intro to the approach would be even more general than this, right? Would even perhaps come here. Like something on political experimentation would be more describing this part here, right? And the primer is something like the primer, about the primer, would be coming here. I mean, it does cover a lot of ground. Like, even if these things are self-contained and so on, they do touch on a lot of stuff already. Like, there's no big chunk that there is no contribution kind of coming close to it, right? Like, there's something on A, B, and C, something. I think we can see that there is more on the connection between B, C, and C. Like, this lower part here is a bit richer in information than the upper part. But again, I don't think that that's a problem at all.
Yeah, that might itself be symptomatic of the weakness of community in.
Yeah, I think so. I had an idea, but I mean, I'm probably gonna try to help out with, 5 or 8, depending on, like 5, 8, or 9. But I've been developing an idea. I think we can actually write we can propose a really serious reading. Like, I would say that here there is a text to be written on psychoanalysis, why psychoanalysis exists only in modernity. Because A plus C is the fact that is the birth of the nuclear family that doesn't include affinity relations beyond consanguinity, right? I mean, the birth of the mommy, baby, daddy family, which is a modern invention, which is from our perspective, we can tell that something is left out, right? It's kind of from Lévi-Strauss' point of view, it would be a bit of a, let's say, dismemberment of the atom of kinship, which included some otherness from outside of your consanguinity line. And psychoanalysis is pretty much the theory of how people feel that reconstitute the atom of kinship under capitalism, right? Capitalism guarantees, because KC restricts the connection of A and B to be only the family lines that carry hereditary relations of property. So it kind of mutilates reciprocity. It can only function partially, right? And psychoanalysis pretty much claims that there is some form of fantasy that fills the gap in reciprocity left by the lack of social structure, right? That's what Freud calls the discontent in civilization. So if we had infinite time, I would probably propose something like that, but
it's the example that I think Karatani on the book, he talks about like totem taboo, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like from that particular point, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, exactly. Or for example, exactly as Alan was saying here, something like talking about popular sovereignty could also fit there.
It
Also,
could be
I mean,
something.
yeah,
It could,
sorry, Javier, yeah.
sorry. So no, go on, go on.
Was just gonna say, I know Efren is not here, but I mean, I had little chance to talk to him yet, but I know he's interested, for example, in relations between machine learning and kind of segregation, the way that algorithms have effects on, data actually carries over racial profiling, gender profiling, and things like this. And that's actually A plus C as well, right? Like this interaction between data as commodity, which doesn't care for these things, it just cares for the information in the data, right? And community structures under capitalism and how those two things interact. So, for example, if he's watching this later on and he wants to write something on that, like, again, it can be fully self-contained and it would fit the same way,
Yeah, that would be really interesting also because like data, like the emergence of like information society in a way like sort of coexists with this promise that actually like information society reconstitutes the gift in another level in any sort of way, like with the promise of a digital commons and so on. And like there's a lot of work on that. It could also be something like I don't know, someone talking about like the erosion of community, maybe like on neo. Like I think there is a particular text that I always remember, like on this relation between A and C. Of course, it doesn't talk in those terms, but like Lauren Berlant's Scroll Optimism, like there is a particular chapter in which she talks about like proletarian life and affect and like the relationship between like job precarity and the promise of like romantic love, for example. It could also be something like that. And like
I think it would also fit in the same, like I think everything that explores this sort of weird connection between either large scale forms of community under capitalism, like nation, popular sovereignty, and so on, or like small scale tensions between family structure, romantic life, things like that. They all fit as well.
I think maybe an interesting way to just organize this would be, I really like Yasha's skeleton, and perhaps instead of organs, we could think of those 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 as theoretical experiments, like making a pair with political experiments and being just like kind of case studies, or like just some kind of exemplar take. And perhaps even before them, so we can separate the text in two. So one of them is more introductory in general. It tells, it makes the introduction to the diagram, how it's organized, to phenomenology, etc. And then you move to this more, to these cases. And then in each one, we could have a reproduction of the diagram, just like highlighting what is at stake and what is appearing in each one. And they can be very particular, and we don't have to cover. We don't have to have a general approach to what is exactly A, B, C, A plus B, A plus C, B plus C. And we don't have to have the generalization and explanation of how all of them are interrelated and in their specific. We're just like taking examples of like thinking about stuff and how they like reveal some aspect of themselves when we think in terms of the diagram. So that could be, I think could like solve the.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that really would work. It's a separate issue. I think that we need to. I mean, we have a very interesting problem to think about, which is, I think, kind of uncommon, in fact, which is if you imagine this as just a linear thing, like with absolutely no cross-referencing of any sort, it might look more confusing than it needs. Right, like we are. Let's say we should add here a third thing, right? Which is there is something. Sorry, here, which is the page, right? And you need to map this not partial, not totally ordered structure into something that actually is linear, right?
Mhm.
So that's actually that we actually have this problem in our hands, and I think that's what we're trying to imagine. Like that's I think why Dennis said it would probably work better as an app or as a weird hyperlinked
Yeah.
page, because it would preserve more structure. When we imagine that you're just writing these things as sections linearly presented, the fact that they're not really coming one after the other, right? There might be something we can divide, as you said, like perhaps section 7 and 5, they are more general, introductory, right? And the other ones look more like slices or snapshots from inside. The big ones, they seem to be, you could say that they're more general than the others, but once you get to the others, there is no internal reason why one should come before the other, right? They should actually be parallel, or they have a more complicated structure. So I think that this issue of how we want to format this thing is actually, in our particular case, is actually quite structural. Like there is something at stake, right? I personally do like the idea that, for example, we could even kind of distinguish in terms of design the fact that the first sections don't have the diagram fully fleshed out. You get to the end of them and you have the diagram constructed. So they already look different because of that, right? It would already justify saying something like, okay, there's a part of the text that, so would be like section 7 and 5, they get to the diagram, but you don't start with it. So that's something that's a specific aspect of those sections, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all the other sections, they are revolving around the same thing. Even if we don't account for everything, it's almost like you always want to have the diagram and say that it is a snapshot, right? So I still like the idea that we try to keep something like this similar diagram constantly present and highlighted. But perhaps there's another idea. I'm not sure if you guys have any thoughts on this. Like,
I mean, if we're thinking of only certain sections of the diagram being relevant at certain times, one option could be, rather than necessarily showing the whole thing, we could still keep it centered, but have only like a section of it still.
Erase the rest, right?
Yeah, I can do that in ticks.
Yeah. Yeah, that could work as well, right? So rather than always having it and adding something on top, just removing the thing that it's not.
So that'll at least give more space to like write around it.
Yeah.
Once we already have the full context constructed, so that.
That's true. That might clear more space on the page, right? Another thing I also thought, based on what Dennis said about the fact that a more hyperlinked space would be more meaningful, is that we can also, let's say, get something like italics or bold fonts when something in a concept appears in one section that we want to say it has a cross connection with something in another section, right? Or some sort of convention, either, let's say, a little asterisk or something like that, right? Because then, though the sections are being read part by part, you get the feeling that they are internally connected in a way that is not linear, right?
Yeah, I don't know how they publish the journal, but like PDFs, you can add hyperlinks to within the PDF.
Yeah, they do actually quite standard. Just open it here, like. If you look at their website, like their last issue, I'm not sure what's the difference here between single and double, but like if you look at this one.
Okay, so it does come as a PDF.
It has a really crazy, I'm not sure why I think that they never reset the paging, the numbering. So it's like 2000 pages of every edition, probably. I'm not sure. But if you look at how it's written, actually everything is bolded. So probably we can't really use bold, but yeah, but if you look at it, it's like title and then just not a lot of text per page, right? Yeah, we need to unbold it when we put something up. Not a lot of text per page, and quite simple. I didn't see any. Yeah, just some pictures and.
We can capitalize Latour's book on the modes of existence.
Yeah, he does that.
Based on a similar experiment. Then in the published version, all the terms that have this kind of cross-referential role are just like capitalized. So
Yeah.
that could be, or we could use hashtags as well, but I think it has a certain tone because of Twitter.
Yeah. Also, look, they publish it in two forms, right? The single page and the double page. For example, one thing we could ask is if they would be willing to put the diagram here in the middle of the double page, you know, because then we can use the fact that there is like a lot of blank space here that is just free, rather than having to occupy like a chunk of the main page, perhaps, you know, and like everyone takes like 4 of these, so 2 of the double pages as a sort of average, right? I don't know.
And nothing precludes us from making this interactive site later. So if
Yeah,
we have
true.
any ideas that don't fit in this format, we could just save it for the website.
Yeah, true. Yeah. In any case, they seemed quite. Actually, fuck. Let me see if that crazy thing we had is still here, just so I can save it. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I think we should also probably have. So we have about a month. Most of this we already have. We know who would be writing, right? So this one, this, and this are ones with no author yet.
Yeah, I think I can probably help out with 5 and 7.
Ah, cool. Okay, so
because
yeah.
7 has some of the like categorical things, but like trying to demathize them, and the diagram, obviously.
Yeah, Dennis, do you think? I mean, I think your text is quite long, the one you wrote for that presentation. But do you think a version of it could kind of go here?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I can work on 8, maybe some 9 also.
Yeah. So, for example, perhaps I could do like I work with Yasha on 5, and you take on 7 by yourself, Yasha. Then Dennis works on 8 because he has like a material we can already use, and I work together with him here.
Okay, I'm writing this down in the thing too.
Yeah, then this is Ransom, John, Harvard,
Yeah, like if you for 5, I've done a paper in which I had to like summarize Karatani stuff. So like I think I can give you guys that, and you can.
That
like,
could be really helpful. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. It could work on that as well. Because it's something like it's like 2 pages, like I think 2 paragraphs per mode, something, and I think we can trim and like tweak it a little bit, change the wording. Could be helpful.
Yeah, and I think that again, like, so probably a good way of thinking about this is to say, I think like just from the top of my head, I would say that we could probably, since not everyone is here and some of the people who are here might like want to join in and not have a clear idea yet of how, like we could imagine that. So we're starting a week now, right? This week we could like start writing those who already have something to write, but still like have more entries of people who will either think it over after this meeting or are watching it later on and might want to kind of pitch in as well. And then we close like the number of entries by the end of the week. right? Then next week, which starts on, I don't know, the 2nd. What am I doing? Today's the 25th, right? Yeah. So next Monday is the 1st, in fact. Then we have the 1st of November to continue writing, and we already have an idea of how many entries. We have this idea of, right, since the double page is a format that they have, I think imagining the 4 pages as a kind of between 2 and 4, right, being kind of an average. And then I would say that by the 8th, no, not by the 8th. The 8th, we could still be working on this. So the next week, the 15th, it would be good that we can already kind of share and start working on, like having this sort of general overview. Everyone sees everything. So we can start fine tuning, right? So we have another week then, or a bit more perhaps, to do this and hand it in by. So probably already also some writing happening. It's enough, but then on the 29th is the deadline, right? Because probably, I mean, just being on the safe side, probably we'll come up with some issue, or I think that this fine-tuning process is important because not only is it so we can actually add cross-references, but for example, we will see if there is repetition. Like if people introducing the diagram and people discussing Karatani for other reasons might go over things in very similar ways. So we might substitute repetition in the text for cross-references and things like that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it'll give us time to help them be able to be like read together better, hopefully too.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think that this sounds like a good deadline, like
yeah,
kind of a good. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, we're lucky because November actually has 5 weeks, right? I thought we're like just around the corner, but actually there's actually a month and a half, not a month between now and the deadline. Yeah, that makes sense to me. I don't know. I think that I even wonder, like, if we're not missing a section here, which is more clearly on, let's say, how to read this paper, because that's not actually like the style of reading or the way we're approaching this. It's actually one of the examples Alain was talking about, right? Because we're structuring this in a way that's coherent with this weird diagram as well, right?
Yeah. I think that this could come, like, it could be something that we assign to someone already, but it would be best if it would come at the end, because I think that it would look even better if it relates to the diagramming of the pages. So for example, like if we have the diagram in the middle, then like we can actually highlight to people, okay, you pay attention to that specific thing in the middle and think about how it. But I think it would be a really good thing that we do like a page on that, and then we start from there actually.
Yeah, it can be the last thing. We can probably even write it together in one of these meetings.
Yeah.
Like no need to worry about it. But I just wonder if it's not good to, have at least some page that is very, let's say, conscious about, look, I know you're looking at something weird. This thing is going to develop in this way,
Yeah, that might be included in the intro to the approach.
Yeah, I think so
that
too.
Seems like,
but
I think that's like kind of the most general. But
yeah, but I wonder, let's say, I mean, it's possible, but I wonder also if you're writing about composition, objective phenomenology, you might feel like you need to stretch out a bit to cover that as well. So if you don't, I think it's fine that we leave it as a separate thing. We're gonna add as an appendix to the introduction kind of thing, right? Reza, I know you're there. If you kind of come up with an idea you want to try, also please feel free. but if you don't, we also need people to just read through the whole thing and, you know, help with the gluing of the sections, right?
Yeah, sounds good.
Sure.
And what are we going to say for A plus B and A plus C? Are we leaving those out?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I'm personally, I'm quite comfortable with the idea that we don't cover everything.
Mhm.
I don't think we should like feel like we need to exhaust stuff, but for people who are not here and watching this later, or for us who are here, it's a good thing to, I don't know, spend this next week, right, until next meeting on next Monday, see if we can come up with something that could be short, because also there is this other issue, right? Nobody needs to write just one thing. Like if you have time, if you can go crazy on it and just add more stuff, why not, right? Plus we could have more sections on the same point. This is actually something we didn't write here, and I wonder if it wouldn't be really cool, because right there's actually another kind of axis that we're not considering, which is you can actually select smaller objects than these big logics.
Mhm.
You can zoom in, right? So for example, you could, for example, exactly as we were talking about before, there's actually an A plus C, which concerns, let's say, the state of law within capitalism. And there is another A plus C, which concerns popular sovereignty under capitalist conditions. In this diagram, they look at the same. They look like they are going to the same thing, but they're actually different, right? So depending on if we have more ideas or people want to write more stuff, like since these entries are kind of short, we might also need to think of how do we distinguish when somebody's taking the same intersection from a kind of finer grain or coarser grain kind of point of view, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that this is the usefulness of breaking it quite arbitrarily between the more theoretical general part explaining the diagram and the theoretical experiments, because then you can kind of just explain that these are not like the content of the diagram. These are just like good examples of like zooming in or zooming out and addressing one part of it and showing what comes out and then relating it back to the diagram, which is always there. And then you're just like formalizing what these different takes kind of review, and not attempt to actually like formulate what characterizes A, B, C, A plus B, A plus C, because that would demand rewriting Karatani's book in a sense.
Yes.
And expanding it and doing something much longer. And anyway.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. But again, I think that, I mean, we possibly, I mean, I said one thing, but now I'm thinking probably we don't need to be so strict. Like, let's say that we're starting to write in the next couple of days, and let's say that, for example, Dennis can use a lot of his original text on political experimentation, and he's done very, very quickly. Why not have more entries coming in later on? You know, I think we just need a deadline before the fine tuning. So probably you can imagine that all the way to here, like we can like discuss in meetings, and if people come up with ideas, we could still have them. We don't need to be so strict, right? On like, I'm not knowing how many entries beforehand, it's not going to help us that much, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. In some sense, this is kind of already like, I would say something like our own journal format, because you could have ongoing entries forever, right?
Yeah, exactly. We're co-opting their journal with a weird inner structure. So every edition we have the diagram again, and then smaller sections around it. And yeah, no, I think that this makes a lot of sense. And I'm gonna try to make an effort to talk to people who were around the last couple of meetings or months and so on, who are more absent now, because I mean, it's a good opportunity to kind of, if you look, I mean, just compare this, right, with our website. Our website has this sort of linear thing, right? It tries to connect things, but it's you don't see the connection other than the fact that we add them afterwards, and it's hard to see a sort of common ground. So this might actually also be a good kind of organizing effort for the group, right? So I think it's also good to try to kind of stimulate people to try their hand on stuff and see that and test that it actually fits and that we can actually accommodate everyone's interests. It's a good kind of moment for that, I think. So probably allowing for very late entries is a good idea as well.
Cool. Yeah, this is a lot of good stuff. Hopefully, we're not spreading ourselves too thin, but
Yeah, I think we
we're
can
making it too all over the place.
Yeah, but I mean, I think we found a good structure to be okay.
Mm.
Like we can be all over the place, and you know, the place is a topos. It's not all over the place.
True.
Also, I mean, I'm optimistic because this is the shortest meeting we ever had. So that's saying something, you know, and it's I think it just goes to show that the compression rate is higher all of a sudden. We
It's
can
slightly
actually,
growing.
yeah. So that's a
I
good,
have most of
good
this
sign.
stuff summarized in the outline brainstorming document
Perfect.
that I put down. So
Yeah. Also, I wouldn't worry too much about these numbering, right? I mean, God knows
Yeah,
which
yeah, yeah.
order we want to put this later on. So with this, I think I can just write them. I'll just tell them that I'll kind of just send either the one that you like the image you sent us, Yasha. I'll just
yeah, I
send it
have it
to
in the
them
document too.
and tell them, look, we have this structure for the paper. We wanted this image to be repeating on every page. We wanted to have like some cross-referencing thing. Just see what they say, right?
Mhm.
With this, I think I can already kind of check their like their constraints as well, right?
Sure. Okay. I'm gonna
Cool,
send-
guys.
Okay.
I was thinking that like also I just had like this thought about how to arrange it. I think another option would be like sort of a column in the page, you know, like a bookmark, like one of those that actually like it puts the diagram, like the full diagram, it puts the slice diagram, and then maybe it puts even like some like small pieces of text on something, like for example, I don't know, K and A and B and C and like some short references on it that would appear every now and then, like between sessions, for example, that would like localize the session.
Sorry, so I'm just, you're saying something like, how do I change clear all the, so for example, something like this. So the page would be like this, and we would actually imagine that it's kind of split in the middle, and this part here has the full diagram, the section we're using, and perhaps some relevant text, and the text only comes on one side.
Yeah, I wouldn't say in half. I would say like a quarter of it would, and it would be
Yeah,
like
sure,
really,
sure. So this is bigger, in fact, than
Yeah.
this.
yeah, like a quarter, sort of like a bookmark page that it could come like every now and then, or it could come on the title, like on the first page of the
Like
of
when you have the
thing.
section title here, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think it could work as something that like would keep people navigating like on the, because then it decomposes the form also, like you have the full thing, you have this, and then if people forget whatever, like what any of those things mean, they can refer to that as well. Like, you know, because it could also be something that becomes not fully readable, but somewhat readable for someone that like just takes a piece of it.
Yeah, I see.
Like just see something that they get interested in. Let's say this, just say, oh yeah, career strike, and then they go, but they localize it within the
Yeah, I
rest
see.
of
Like
the
the
work.
map is on the side, right? Because
Yeah, the map
that
is
might
on
be
the
a better
side.
option, because I tried on InDesign to see what, like, if you had the diagram in the middle of the page. These areas here are impossible to use. Like, it would have to be very small to make the sides of it useful. So you would only have these two blocks here, you know, and they already have like a very big font.
Yeah.
So even if it's just in one page of each section and not in every page, it's still kind of bulky. Probably if they are okay with like slide, like, well, probably it's up to them. We can ask and suggest something, but you're right. Probably this thing here makes it easier to read and doesn't take that much space. In my, like, I had this, if this was a printed artsy thing, I would probably love if they could just have, let's say, the diagram is on the last page, we just carve a hole here.
Yeah.
So it's obvious that all the pages are kind of pierced through like this, right?
Yeah.
Like, and they're all like this, but yeah.
Something like there is a Brazilian publisher that I have in mind in particular.
Yes, I know the one you're,
yeah,
I know the one you're thinking.
yeah,
It would probably be made of strings, right? The book.
yeah.
If they were
of
publishing it.
course. Wrapped up in something, I don't know.
Yeah, in a category, yes.
Yeah.
Because they're like very artsy in there. Like they do books like on animal rights, and then it's covered in fur, you know, things like that.
Yeah, it's very committed. Like they had one that was in the format of like we have this particular type of container that workers take for lunch, and it's like an aluminum one, and it goes in the oven and stuff. And they made a book around those lines that like you would open and it would look just like a wrapped lunch. But also everything there is like 100 reais or so, at least. The editions become very expensive.
Yeah. Anyway, so but still, I think we're on a good path. I'll just like make sure I tell them what we're thinking, so next time we have a clearer sense of what they are they find acceptable, right?
Yeah, I also sent a slightly better version of the diagram. It's still not perfect. I can't figure out how to move the labels, but in the WhatsApp group, if you want to send it to me.
Could you? I saw it. Could you send me a version without the capitalist object thing? Because since it's such a long arrow.
We don't need that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'll send that to you.
Great.
I guess just directly in this. Also.
Perfect. I will mail them tomorrow morning, and I'll let you guys know what they say.
Okay.
Guys, great meeting.
Okay, great.
Renzo, safe
10 minutes
travels. See you guys later.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.